I'd love you to talk a little bit more about this idea of this infallible assurance of our salvation. So like it sounded like you were saying when you would see yourself sliding into serious sin, it would cause you to wonder whether or not you were even a Christian, right?
Yes.
So what I want to know is, what would somebody say in response to that? Like, what does James White, who will undoubtedly watch this video, say in response to that?
Yeah, so they're going to make it a distinction between objective and subjective assurance. So assurance as to the object of faith. So when I'm trusting in Christ, who is the one who saves me, right, versus me feeling like I'm saved. So it's that objective assurance that's going to matter. The subjective can go up and down based on how you live.
Sure. I'm trying to think what a nice earthly or natural analogy might be. You know, like, I don't know, I'm just thinking on the spot here. Maybe you're deathly allergic to something, right? And then you start to feel sick and you suspect that maybe you accidentally had that thing you're deathly allergic to and you become paranoid about that. But objectively, you know you never took that thing. This is a bad analogy. Help me out.
No, that kind of works. It's it's like, you know.
So it's regardless of how you feel, something has taken place, and that's what you put your dependence on, namely Christ and his action, not how you feel.
Yes, it's Christ's action exterior to you alone that saves. I think that's a good way to put how Reformed people think.
But am I right in thinking that if a Reformed individual apostatized, I never get that right. Apostatized?
Either way.
All right.
Yeah,
is it really?
Yeah. Apostatized is how I would say it, but I've heard people say it both ways.
All right, so somebody apostatizes. I suppose at that point, his Reformed brethren would say he was not actually a Christian to begin with, and we now know that. But that would, and I'm sure there's a good response to this, so I'm not trying to straw man the position, but that would terrify me, because I'd be like, okay, so if, maybe it wouldn't terrify me, but if there are people around me who leave the faith and I go, they were never a Christian to begin with, but their subjective experience before that apostatizing was presumably identical to mine, how the hell do I know that I won't one day do that?
That was my, I mean, I got into not an argument, kind of a discussion with my favorite professor at RBC about this in class. And this was my point with him. It was like, if anybody can just walk away at any point and then they just weren't saved to begin with, right? Then like, what are we doing? Like, what are we talking about? Because I don't have an infallible assurance objectively in that case, because if I'm looking externally to myself, I can see that there are people who trick themselves. So if I think I objectively have faith, what if I'm just objectively tricking myself? So you have this kind of like, what is going on?
Yeah. And is that, in your estimation, like, is that a common sort of experience of?
Oh yeah.
It is. Okay.
Oh yeah. All over the place. Yeah.
Because I mean, right now it doesn't sound terribly different to me as a Catholic. Like, I have a moral assurance of my salvation.
Yes. Yep.
Whenever I receive Eucharist, I'm stating I have a moral assurance of my salvation.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
And yet I know that I've seen people who are deceiving themselves.
Yes.
We all know people who are like, this person thinks they're good, but they're really bad.
Yeah.
Right?
You're right.
And
you can see that.
And you have to
sometimes.
think, okay, well, if I'm right about that assessment, it's true that I could be as deluded. So I can't have an infallible assurance of my salvation, at least for that one reason. But so all of a sudden, it sounds like the Calvinist and the Catholic are having a similar experience, but they're talking about it in different ways.
Yes, very similar. Because what we both came down to in that discussion with my professor was the way you really have assurance is by living the Christian life, partaking of the sacraments, hearing the word preached, things like that. I mean, Catholics can answer the same way.
And Aquinas in the Summa talks about this. He talks about like whether if we despise the world, love heavenly things, that these are signs of our salvation.
Yeah, there's all kinds of messy interpretation of like the anathemas at Trent against. I believe there's an anathema at Trent talking about the assurance of salvation, that somebody knows for certain that they are one of the elect, right? So for the Calvinists, they're going to say we can.
Yes.
For Augustine and for Catholics, you're going to say, no, I can't know for certain unless there's some kind of
and that's what
revelation.
Ludwig Ott in the Fundamentals of Catholic Dogma points out is the Council of Trent never said one cannot have a moral assurance of our salvation. Presumably, we ought to have that.
Yes. So I think that's kind of what's difficult is this is one thing I've been finding. I've been reading On Divine Revelation by Father Garrigou-Lagrange. I just worked through both volumes, actually. And there's a whole section here where he talks about how I forget whether he says it's at the time of the Reformation, but I think you can see this happening around the time of the Reformation either way. Forgive me if I'm strawmanning Calvinist here. I'm really not trying to. This is just kind of my sort of hypothesis. Somebody critique me if I'm wrong. But it's that the speculative intellect, which is what knows things in themselves. So it's like I can know this water bottle in itself, tends to get weakened or at least not distinguished enough from the practical intellect, which looks at things in accordance with their use. And so you end up having a lot of arguments in Calvinist theology from the practical intellect or moral arguments, things like that, from like a lower kind of reasoning, but not enough kind of speculative thought. And by speculative, I don't mean like, oh, we're just gonna fly off into the clouds. I mean knowing the thing in itself in a very concrete way. This goes back to the discussion in the garden again too. They just will simply say, for Adam, Adam is naturally made in holiness, right? And so Adam is holy by nature, basically. It's not looking at it, breaking it down, and abstracting. Adam is one person. We're not going to disagree with that. Historically, there's one reality in that Adam is, one holy man who is made, right? He's made in holiness. The question is, what makes him holy? And so the Reformed are going to reject, well, they're not going to reject. The least the Reformed I was talking to at RBC, our professors would reject most likely the idea that grace is an accident which inheres in the soul. So an accident is something that follows upon a substance, whereas a substance is what makes a thing what it is, so in itself. So Adam substantially is a man, right? And when he has grace, he's now a graced man, right? But if Adam doesn't have grace, he's still a man, right? This is kind of the thing. So I think what ends up happening there is the language just isn't clear enough in most of the Reformed tradition, at least contemporarily. In the past, I can find positions where they very much will say grace is an accident that inheres in the soul. They just don't see it quite the same way. They're not going to call it a super added grace that comes from above. That's a whole theoretical discussion. We don't have to go into that. But this leads to, from the beginning, the differences in how we set up, how we view salvation history, which changes how we view our entire soteriology, the entire economy of the covenants. Everything kind of hinges on that point of what is man and what is, like, how does this all work together?
Do you mind me asking how that conversation was resolved with your university professor about wondering whether or not you're a Christian? Because you said that was a discussion you got into. How did that resolve?
Oh, back to assurance?
Yeah, sorry to jump back.
No, you're okay. That was resolved, I think, with us both agreeing on the fact that we just have to have the sacraments, think about these kinds of things, right? And just live.
And the sacrament. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe or you're a dingus. What's a dingus exactly?
Used to refer to something one cannot or does not wish to name specifically.
You don't have to subscribe, but if you did, I'd love it. You dingus.
Like the video. That's who we're using that one. Take